Winston Churchill's daily routine, maintained from his 60s into his 80s, should have killed him decades before it did. He drank a bottle of champagne, half a bottle of brandy, and whiskey from breakfast onwards. He smoked 8 to 10 cigars daily. He worked 18-hour days on 4 to 5 hours of broken sleep. He ate rich food, took scalding 2-hour baths, and subjected his body to stress that would hospitalize most people. His doctors were genuinely baffled. By every medical measure, Churchill should have been dead by 60. Instead, he led Britain through World War II at age 65, served as Prime Minister twice, and lived to 90. This is the complete, medically impossible daily routine of Winston Churchill, hour by hour, habit by habit, and what his doctors actually said about the man who defied every health recommendation and somehow thrived anyway. Let's start with what Churchill did while most people were commuting to work: absolutely nothing. He was still asleep. But his morning, when it eventually began, started in a way that would horrify modern doctors. Around 8 a.m., if he'd actually gone to bed at a reasonable hour, rare, Churchill would wake up. A servant would bring him breakfast in bed. Not toast and coffee. A full English breakfast: eggs, bacon, possibly kidneys or other organ meat, toast, butter, jam. Rich, heavy food first thing, and with this breakfast came the first drink of the day: weak whiskey and soda. Not a shot. A proper drink. Churchill called it Papa Cocktail, named after his father. The whiskey was diluted heavily with soda water. But it was still alcohol at 8 a.m. His doctors were horrified by this. Starting the day with alcohol? Your liver is trying to process the previous night's drinking, and you're immediately adding more? But Churchill was adamant. The weak whiskey helped him think, helped him wake up, and he'd been doing it for decades. Here's where Churchill's routine gets truly unusual. He didn't get up. He stayed in bed, propped up with pillows, wearing silk pajamas and a dressing gown, and he worked. Secretaries would arrive with documents, correspondence, reports. Churchill would read through everything, dictating responses, annotating papers, making decisions about government policy and military strategy, all while still in bed, usually with a cigar already lit. This wasn't laziness. Churchill had discovered he was most mentally sharp in the morning after waking, but he saw no reason why he needed to be vertical or dressed to think clearly. The bed was comfortable. Why move? Government ministers and military commanders learned to expect morning summonses to Churchill's bedroom. You'd arrive at the Prime Minister's residence and be shown upstairs to his bedroom, where you'd find him propped up against pillows, papers spread across his bed, cigar smoke filling the room, and Churchill firing questions at you about military operations or domestic policy. Imagine being a military general, summoned to discuss strategy with the Prime Minister, and his conducting the meeting in his pajamas. Modern sleep specialists would actually partially approve of this part. Churchill was respecting his natural sleep cycle. He was a night owl forced to function in a day-oriented world, so he adapted by creating his own schedule. But the drinking? The heavy breakfast? The immediate stress and work upon waking? All terrible ideas medically. Your body needs time to transition from sleep to full alertness. Your cortisol levels are rising, your blood pressure is increasing, your digestive system is waking up. Immediately hitting it with alcohol, heavy food, and high-stress decision-making is asking for cardiovascular problems, but Churchill did this daily for decades. His system somehow adapted to processing alcohol and rich food immediately upon waking. Churchill would continue working from bed until around 1 p.m., sometimes later. 5 hours or more of meetings, dictation, reading, decision-making, all conducted from his bedroom. His secretaries worked in shifts. No single person could keep up with Churchill's dictation pace. He'd think out loud, dictate letters, change his mind, dictate corrections, jump between topics, all while smoking and occasionally sipping his whiskey. The volume of work was staggering. During the war, Churchill was personally reading intelligence reports, military updates, diplomatic cables, domestic policy papers, thousands of pages per week, and responding to much of it personally. All from bed, in his pajamas. Around 1 p.m., 5 hours after waking, Churchill would finally get out of bed. He'd bathe, dress, and prepare for lunch. Note the timing here: most people have been awake and working for 4 to 5 hours by 1 p.m. Churchill was just getting started with his visible workday. This late start created problems. Foreign dignitaries would arrive expecting to meet the Prime Minister at normal business hours, only to be told he was still in bed. Military briefings scheduled for morning had to be delayed. The British government essentially operated on Churchill time, which bore little resemblance to normal office hours, but his staff adapted. If Churchill was most productive from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. while in bed, then that's when you scheduled important meetings and decisions. You worked around his schedule because arguing with Churchill about changing his routine was pointless. Churchill's lunches were legendary and long. They'd start around 1 or 1:30 p.m. and last until 3 p.m. or even later. These weren't light meals. Multiple courses. Roast meat, vegetables, rich sauces, desserts. And wine. Always wine. Usually champagne. Churchill would have guests at lunch: ministers, military officers, diplomats, friends. Lunch was both social occasion and working meeting. He'd discuss policy over soup, debate strategy over the main course, and make decisions over dessert, and he'd drink. Not to drunkenness, Churchill had an extraordinary tolerance, but steadily. A bottle of champagne over lunch was normal for him. His guests would try to keep up and fail. Churchill would still be sharp and clear-headed while others were fighting wine-induced fog. His doctors repeatedly told him to cut back on drinking with meals. Your liver can only process so much alcohol. You're drinking at breakfast, at lunch, and you'll drink at dinner. Your liver never gets a break. This will catch up with you. Churchill's response? He'd lived this way for decades and felt fine. His liver, apparently, had adapted to constant alcohol processing. Or perhaps he was just lucky genetically. Either way, he ignored medical advice completely. Throughout lunch and all day, Churchill smoked cigars constantly. Not cigarettes, cigars. Large, expensive cigars, usually Cuban when he could get them. He'd light a cigar in the morning and keep one going almost continuously until bedtime. 8 to 10 cigars per day. He'd chew them, let them go out and relight them, smoke them down to tiny stubs. The cigar was as much part of Churchill as his voice. The health implications are obvious and severe. Cigar smoking causes mouth cancer, throat cancer, lung cancer, COPD, and cardiovascular disease. Even without inhaling deeply, the constant exposure to smoke and nicotine was poisoning him slowly. Churchill had some close calls. He had minor strokes during the war years, one in 1941. Another in 1943, kept secret from the public. These were warning signs. His cardiovascular system was under enormous strain, but he refused to stop smoking. The cigars helped him think, he claimed. They were part of his image. They calmed his nerves. Whatever the health cost, he considered it worth paying. Here's where Churchill's routine gets interesting medically. Around 3 or 4 p.m., after lunch, Churchill would go to bed and sleep for 90 minutes to 2 hours. This wasn't a light doze. Churchill would completely undress, put on pajamas, get into bed properly, and sleep deeply. His staff knew not to disturb him except for genuine emergencies. Even during the Blitz, even during military crises, Churchill took his afternoon nap. His doctors actually approved of this. The nap was possibly the only genuinely healthy part of Churchill's routine. It gave his body a break, lowered his stress levels, and let him function on relatively little nighttime sleep. Churchill himself said, "You must sleep sometime between lunch and dinner. And no halfway measures. Take off your clothes and get into bed. That's what I always do. Don't think you will be doing less work because you sleep during the day. That's a foolish notion held by people who have no imaginations. You will be able to accomplish more." He was right. Sleep researchers now recognize that biphasic sleep, nighttime sleep plus a daytime nap, can be more refreshing than a single long sleep period. Churchill had accidentally stumbled onto something scientifically valid. The nap essentially gave Churchill 2 days in one. He'd wake from his nap around 5 or 5:30 p.m. feeling refreshed and energized, ready to work until 2 or 3 a.m. It was like resetting. He'd work a full day from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Sleep, then work another full day from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. Modern chronobiology research shows Churchill was onto something. The afternoon nap allowed him to function on less nighttime sleep without severe sleep deprivation, reduce cardiovascular stress by giving his heart a daily rest period, consolidate memories and process information learned in the morning, reset his stress hormones and cortisol levels. If you're going to work 18-hour days into your 70s and 80s, the afternoon nap is probably essential. Without it, Churchill's routine would have been even more medically catastrophic, but here's the catch: the nap only works if you can fully disconnect and sleep deeply. Most people can't do that. They're too anxious, too wired, or they sleep too lightly. Churchill had the ability to fall asleep instantly and deeply, then wake fully alert. That's a rare gift. Churchill would wake from his nap, bathe again, he loved baths, dress for dinner, and begin what he considered the evening's work. He'd often change into evening clothes, dinner jacket or even white tie for formal dinners. Note the timing, it's 5:30 p.m. Most people are thinking about ending their workday. Churchill felt like he'd just woken up fresh and had a whole new day ahead of him. This is when he'd take meetings with military commanders, work on speeches, handle correspondence that had accumulated during his nap, and prepare for dinner and the evening's events. He'd also start drinking again. The evening whiskey and soda, possibly some sherry before dinner, preparing for the wine that would accompany the meal. Churchill's dinners were even more elaborate than his lunches. They'd start around 8 or 8:30 p.m. and could last until 11 p.m. or even midnight. Multiple courses, rich French-style food, excellent wines, champagne, port, and brandy. He'd have 6 to 12 guests usually, ministers, generals, admirals, diplomats, visiting dignitaries, sometimes personal friends. Dinner was where Churchill held court. He'd tell stories, debate ideas, test out speeches, and make decisions that affected the course of the war. The conversation was the point as much as the food. Churchill would dominate the discussion, but he also listened. Dinner was where he'd sound out ideas, get feedback from trusted advisors, and gauge reactions to policies he was considering, and he'd drink steadily throughout. Wine with each course, champagne, then port after the meal, then brandy with cigars. By modern medical standards, Churchill was consuming catastrophic amounts of alcohol daily. Estimates suggest 1 to 2 bottles of champagne, half a bottle of brandy, plus whiskey and wine throughout the day. His liver function tests, taken periodically during the war years, showed some elevation but not severe damage. Somehow, his liver was processing this alcohol load without failing. Doctors couldn't explain it except to note that Churchill had been drinking this way since his 20s. His body had adapted over decades. Churchill's dinners weren't just meals, they were performances. He'd be on, entertaining, provocative, witty. He'd quote poetry, make historical references, tell jokes, often dark and cutting, and generally dominate the room. But this was also work. Churchill was using dinner to manage his political relationships, to keep subordinates loyal, to impress visitors, and to maintain his image as a larger-than-life figure. The drinking and storytelling were tools of leadership. There was a darker side. Churchill could be cruel at these dinners. He'd mock people, make cutting remarks, test how much verbal abuse someone would take. Not out of malice exactly, but as a way of dominating and controlling. If you could handle Churchill's dinner table, you could handle the stress of wartime leadership. His staff dreaded dinner invitations. You'd sit there for hours, eating food you might not want, drinking more than you should, listening to Churchill talk, never knowing if he'd suddenly turn his attention to you with a question or a challenge. It was exhausting. Eating heavy meals late at night is terrible for digestion and metabolism. Your body wants to wind down in the evening, not process a feast. The combination of alcohol, rich food, and staying up late creates perfect conditions for acid reflux and digestive issues, disrupted sleep architecture, elevated nighttime blood pressure, increased cardiovascular strain, poor glucose metabolism. Churchill suffered from digestive problems throughout his life, hardly surprising given how he ate. He also had the strokes mentioned earlier. His cardiovascular system was under constant assault, but again, he lived to 90. Somehow, despite doing everything wrong, his body kept functioning. After dinner, guests would leave, and Churchill would begin what he considered his most important work of the day, writing and dictating. He'd go to his study with a secretary and dictate letters, memos, speeches, sometimes entire chapters of his historical books. This would go on until 2, 3, sometimes 4 a.m. Churchill's secretaries worked in rotating shifts because no single person could keep up with him. You'd be called to his study at 11 p.m. and work until 2 a.m., then be relieved by another secretary who'd work until Churchill finally went to bed. The volume of work Churchill produced during these late-night sessions was staggering. His 6-volume history of World War II, written mostly in the late 1940s and early 1950s, largely dictated during these evening sessions. His thousands of wartime memos and letters? Late-night dictation. He'd pace while dictating, smoking a cigar, sipping brandy, thinking out loud. He'd dictate a paragraph, cross it out, dictate it again differently. He'd work on multiple documents simultaneously, jumping between topics as thoughts occurred to him. Churchill loved baths, extremely hot baths that would turn his skin red. He'd take multiple baths per day, often for an hour or more at a time, and he'd work in the bath. A secretary would sit in the bathroom with a notepad while Churchill soaked and dictated. Government ministers would be summoned to the bathroom for meetings. Military commanders would discuss strategy while Churchill was in the tub, naked, submerged in scalding water. This seems bizarre, but Churchill was serious about it. The hot water relaxed him, helped him think, eased his muscles after long days of sitting. He saw no reason why being in a bath should prevent him from working. His doctors worried about this too. Extended exposure to very hot water stresses your cardiovascular system. Your heart rate increases, your blood vessels dilate, your blood pressure changes. For someone Churchill's age, with his lifestyle, it was another risk factor, but Churchill loved his baths and wouldn't give them up. His staff learned to have towels ready, to keep the water hot, and to take notes while trying not to look directly at the naked Prime Minister. Somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m., Churchill would finally go to bed. He'd sleep until 8 a.m., so 4 to 6 hours of nighttime sleep, plus the 90-minute afternoon nap, giving him about 5.5 to 7.5 hours total sleep per 24 hours. This is below the recommended 7 to 9 hours for adults, and well below what most 70 to 80-year-olds need. Sleep deprivation is associated with cognitive decline, increased disease risk, and shorter lifespan, but Churchill maintained this schedule for decades. He'd been a night owl his whole life. His body seemed adapted to functioning on less sleep than normal people needed, supplemented by that crucial afternoon nap. Churchill's personal physician during much of World War II and after was Lord Moran, Charles Wilson. Moran kept detailed notes, later published as Churchill, The Struggle for Survival. Moran was genuinely puzzled by Churchill's health. By every measure, Churchill should have been dead or severely disabled. His lifestyle was a catalogue of risk factors: heavy alcohol consumption daily, heavy smoking, cigars, rich diet high in fat and cholesterol, minimal exercise, high-stress occupation, irregular sleep patterns, advanced age, 65 when he became wartime PM. Moran repeatedly advised Churchill to cut back on drinking, smoking, and working. Churchill largely ignored him. When Moran pushed too hard, Churchill would find reasons to avoid seeing him for weeks. Churchill did suffer consequences. He had a stroke in 1949, kept largely secret. Another more serious stroke in 1953, while serving his second term as Prime Minister, left him partially paralyzed for weeks. This was hidden from the public. The official story was that Churchill needed rest. He recovered remarkably well from the 1953 stroke, but it should have been a clear sign to retire. He was 78, he'd had a major stroke, his body was telling him to stop. Instead, he continued as Prime Minister until 1955, finally resigning at 80. Even after resigning, Churchill maintained a version of his routine until very near the end. The drinking continued, the cigars continued, the late nights continued. He died in 1965 at 90, finally brought down by a series of strokes. Part of Churchill's survival was probably genetic luck. Some people are simply more resilient to alcohol, tobacco, and stress than others. Churchill may have had protective genetic variants that let him tolerate his lifestyle. His father died at 45, possibly from syphilis but also from alcoholism and poor health. So Churchill didn't inherit universal invulnerability. But something in his specific genetic makeup, liver function, cardiovascular resilience, stress hormone regulation, let him survive treatment that would kill most people, the stress paradox. There's a medical paradox. Churchill's high-stress life should have killed him, but it may have also kept him alive. Churchill fought severe depression, his black dog, throughout his life. The constant work, the sense of purpose, the feeling of being essential, these kept him engaged with life. When Churchill finally retired in 1955, he declined rapidly. Without the work, without the purpose, he deteriorated. Some people seem to thrive on stress and collapse without it. Churchill may have been one of them. The drinking and smoking were self-medication for anxiety and depression. The work was what kept him alive. Take away the stress, and he had nothing to live for. Modern medical science still can't fully explain Churchill. We know his lifestyle should have been fatal much earlier. We know he had some lucky genetics. We know the afternoon nap helped significantly. But none of that fully accounts for functioning at such a high level, under such extreme conditions, into his 80s. Some theories: 1. Hormesis, maybe the constant mild stress actually strengthened his system through adaptation. 2. Mental compensation, his extraordinary mind may have helped compensate for physical decline. 3. Routine stability, despite seeming chaotic, his routine was actually very consistent, which may have helped his body adapt. 4. Purpose, having vital work may have literally kept him alive through psychological and physiological mechanisms we don't fully understand. Or maybe he was just unbelievably lucky and would have lived even longer with better habits. If Churchill walked into a doctor's office today with his lifestyle and habits, here's what he'd hear: Mr. Churchill, you're consuming roughly 10 to 15 units of alcohol daily when 14 per week is considered the safe maximum. You have severe alcohol dependency and need treatment. Your cigar smoking is causing chronic lung damage and cardiovascular disease. You need to quit immediately. Your diet is causing obesity, high cholesterol, and metabolic syndrome. You need to eat less, eat healthier, and exercise. Your sleep schedule is disrupted and insufficient. You need regular sleep on a normal circadian rhythm. Your stress levels are catastrophically high. You need to reduce your workload immediately. If you continue this lifestyle, you will die within months to years. These aren't suggestions, this is medical reality, and Churchill would have thanked the doctor politely and completely ignored every word. Churchill's routine was medically impossible and shouldn't be imitated. He survived despite his habits, not because of them. For every Churchill who lives to 90 with terrible habits, there are thousands who die at 50 or 60. That said, there are some genuinely interesting takeaways. The afternoon nap was brilliant. If you can actually implement it, and most jobs won't allow it, a 90-minute afternoon nap can dramatically extend your productive hours and reduce stress. Churchill essentially had 2 productive periods, morning and evening, separated by a nap. This is more aligned with natural human sleep patterns than the modern 8 consecutive hours model, but you need to actually sleep deeply, which requires a quiet, dark environment and the ability to fully disconnect. Most people can't replicate Churchill's bathroom and bedroom setup. Churchill's routine was bizarre but consistent. He did the same things at the same times every day for decades. His body adapted to his schedule because it was predictable. There's some evidence that consistent routine, even if objectively unhealthy, may be less harmful than erratic behavior. Your body can adapt to regular stress better than unpredictable stress. Churchill believed his work was essential. That sense of purpose probably extended his life. People with strong sense of purpose tend to live longer and healthier lives. When Churchill retired and lost his purpose, he declined rapidly. The work wasn't just stressful, it was life-sustaining. Churchill proves that individual responses to lifestyle factors vary dramatically. Some people can smoke, drink, and stress their way to 90. Others die young from perfect lifestyles. Genetics matter enormously. This doesn't mean health advice is useless, it's based on population averages and significantly improves your odds. But it means individual outcomes vary wildly. Don't think Churchill's survival proves you can ignore health advice. For every Churchill, there are countless people who died in their 50s or 60s from similar lifestyles. Survivor bias is real. The fact that Churchill lived to 90 doesn't mean his lifestyle was optimal or even acceptable. It means he got lucky genetically and medically. His doctors were right to be concerned, he just happened to survive despite their predictions. Here's an interesting thought experiment. What if Churchill had lived healthily? No alcohol, no smoking, regular sleep, exercise, healthy diet. Maybe he lives to 100 instead of 90. Or maybe he's so bored and depressed without his vices that he dies younger. Maybe the alcohol and tobacco were self-medication for mental illness that would have been untreated otherwise. We can't know. But it's worth considering that for Churchill specifically, his terrible lifestyle might have been somewhat optimal for him, even if it wouldn't be for others. Some modern executives and leaders have tried to implement versions of Churchill's schedule: the biphasic sleep, the long working hours, the intense focus. Usually it doesn't work. Why? Because most people don't have Churchill's genetic resilience, his supportive staff infrastructure, his position allowing complete schedule control, or his particular combination of mental energy and physical tolerance. Churchill's routine worked for Churchill. It's not generalizable. Winston Churchill's daily routine was medically impossible. He drank from breakfast onwards, smoked constantly, ate terribly, slept irregularly, worked obsessively, and subjected his body to stress that should have killed him decades before it did. His doctors were baffled. Every medical prediction said he shouldn't survive. Yet he led Britain through World War II at 65, served as Prime Minister twice, wrote 40 books, and lived to 90. How? Partly genetic luck. Partly the afternoon nap that gave his body necessary rest. Partly an iron will and sense of purpose that kept him functioning when his body wanted to quit. And partly, probably, just random chance. Churchill proves that human biology is more variable and resilient than we sometimes assume. But he also proves that surviving terrible habits is the exception, not the rule. His routine shouldn't be imitated. It should be studied as an example of human extremes, of what's barely possible for a uniquely constituted individual, and of how little we still understand about health, longevity, and human performance. Churchill was medically impossible. But he happened anyway. Could you maintain Churchill's routine? Let me know in the comments. But please don't actually try it.